We're thrilled to have you all with us here in the room, and also those of you who are joining us on live via live stream. And we are deeply honored and delighted to have Joanne Waldstreicher with us. Joanne, Dr. Waldstreicher, is the Chief Medical Officer of Johnson & Johnson. She has oversight across pharmaceuticals, devices, consumer products as well, for safety, epidemiology, clinical, and regulatory operations. She works on many internal and external partnerships and collaborations, supporting the development of ethical science, technology, and R&D, including clinical trial transparency and compassionate access. And as many of you know, J&J has really been in the forefront of the pharmaceutical industry, I think, in helping to promote ethical practices. She chairs the Pharmaceutical R&D Development Committee and does many other things for J&J. She also is a faculty affiliate of the Division of Medical Ethics in the Department of Population Health at NYU. She trained at Harvard for medical school and did an endocrine fellowship at Mass General Hospital. She has won many awards and scholarships for her work, and we are delighted to have her with us, and please join me in welcoming her.
Really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and including me. And I thought I'd just start off by asking you, I don't know any of you, or maybe I know one of you, but I don't know most of you. Let me just ask you guys, how many of you kind of think, and it's okay, you could admit it, it might be unethical maybe to work with a pharmaceutical company or to consult for a company? It's okay, you can raise your hands. Okay, there's one person. It's okay, you know, something that we deal with and I've seen a lot. Anybody else wanna, no? Okay, well, it's important. I wanted to kind of get that out because a lot of people have thoughts about how we act, what we do. And I thought I would share with you, kind of take a journey with you through some of the bioethical considerations that we have to take into account in our day-to-day work in a pharmaceutical company or in a big healthcare company in what we call the healthcare industry. So let me just start a little bit by telling you a little bit about J&J, where I work. Most of you think of J&J and you think of baby shampoo. But I actually want to tell you that's a small part of our company. We were established in the 1800s. We were the first, our founder was one of the first people to realize in the United States that the lectures that he was hearing about sterilizing surgical products, you know, needles and thread to use for surgery. He was listening to Dr. Lister and realized that that was probably really important and a major cause of morbidity and mortality. The mortality rate from surgery back then was extremely high. And he started a whole business to try to bring sterile sutures, sterile kits, first aid kits that were sterile to surgery, to areas where there was a need, like trains where there were often accidents and they needed sterile products. So we actually started as a medical device company and through the years became more of a consumer company than a pharmaceutical company. And we are now one of the largest pharmaceutical companies. Our pharmaceutical group is called Janssen or Janssen. Our device group, medical devices, one of the largest in the world, J&J Medical Devices. But we still have our iconic, very small part of J&J consumer company with our baby shampoo. But we've been around for a while. And in fact, we only became public in the 1940s. General Johnson, who was in charge of the company at the time, actually decided that, wow, before we became public, before there were shareholders, he really wanted to set out the ethics of the company. So it's something that we call the credo, and it's the 75th anniversary of the credo right now. And so he laid these principles out for the company, which still lives today, and we live and work by this credo even today. And we have it hanging up everywhere in the company. We have sessions where we vet it and we challenge it. And basically what the credo does, it has 4 paragraphs, as you can see here. That's a copy of the credo. And the most important part of the credo is that it puts patients, mothers, fathers, children, doctors, nurses, the people who use our products, it puts them first in everything that we do. And it lays out that when we make decisions, these are the people who should be considered first and foremost. And then it considers our employees. We have to be fair to our employees, our communities. And if we do all of those things right, that's when our shareholders would get a return on their investment. So those are the principles of our company. And the Credo has led to, of course, many policies and codes that we have within J&J. One of them is our Code of Business Conduct. And another one is our ethical code for the conduct of clinical research, and development. Really comes out of the Credo, and once again, it makes us realize that our most important party when we do clinical research especially is the patient, the volunteer, the participant who is in our clinical trial. And that first and foremost in any decision that we have to make in research, that patient, that person comes first in any decision no matter what. So about 5 years ago, I was asked by the CEO, as I was a group of people, I was asked, we had this kind of leadership meeting, a very small group of people invited every couple of months to meet with the CEO and give him ideas on what he would do or what he should do at the company. And my idea was to establish an independent group within J&J. We fondly call it the Office of the Chief Medical Officer. We did not have a Chief Medical Officer at J&J at the time. We didn't have one. But my idea was to establish that, and little did I know, about a year later, I was asked to take that role. Be careful what you ask for, that's the lesson. But anyway, it's an internal group because we have a lot of responsibilities, but it's independent. It's independent from any of the commercial groups. It's also independent from the R&D groups, independent from regulatory, quality, all the other groups, legal. And we are responsible for, our group is responsible for the critical, important safety decisions that we make with our products. And this was the basis of my proposal because I really believe that safety decisions should be made by people who do not have to worry about what we call P&L in the industry, profit and loss, right? My whole group, by the way, is just loss. You know, we're just, we don't make any profit. But I really felt that people who had to make such important decisions like that should be independent, even of R&D, because the R&D people, many of them are physicians, scientists. Sometimes they get caught up with timelines, you know, and they love their products. They've been working on them for years. And sometimes that brings in kind of almost an unconscious bias. You know, they're working on the products to bring important transformational innovation to patients. But sometimes there are tough decisions to make, and I felt that it was important that we had independent decision making. Internal, but independent. And as I'll talk through today, I really believe sometimes decisions are so important and so complex that we need independent external help and expertise in making those decisions. And I hope that I'll convince you and anyone else who didn't want to raise his or her hand that we really need, and I think from a public health perspective, the public should want us to work with external experts. You don't want us to make certain decisions on our own, and I really believe that that external expert input is critical for public health, not just for us in industry. It's for making good decisions about important decisions about our products, about safety, and about bioethical concerns. So my group is in charge of safety, but also epidemiology, use of real-world data, and Bob talked a lot about other responsibilities, but one of the key ones is the policies of our company that have bioethical implications across R&D. So it's central to the work in my group, and as you know, this is just a small list of how bioethics is critical: benefit risk assessment and communication, conflict of interest, data transparency, data sharing, emerging technologies which raise all kinds of bioethical issues that we're now just needing to think about. I mean, who even dreamed that we'd be thinking about these things? Medication access, compassionate access, pre-approval access, post-trial access, drug supply shortages and interruptions. How do you triage those? Whom do you give access to? The whole issue of ethics in research and vulnerable populations. This is just a small list. This is not even a comprehensive list of the issues. And we think about the 4 principles of bioethics. And our group prides ourselves that we're the ones in the meetings that say, okay, let's stop. Let's stop talking about the product And let's talk about the people who are using our product. Let's think about the 4 principles, the 4 bioethical principles, and let's figure out together how to make this decision. And our decisions have really important impact for people. I'm sure all of you have seen headlines. So the headlines we love, right, and what we live and breathe and go to work every day to try to accomplish is to bring transformational products to patients, right? Products that help people with cancer. Maybe products that cure cancer, right? We're working on a CAR T, which is actually curing some people with cancer. Whoever thought that we would even be saying that, right? Products that cure hepatitis C or infections. Products that help people who are mentally ill, people with schizophrenia, people with depression. That's what we live and breathe for. But it's not just about the products, right? It's how we do it, how we develop those products, how we make decisions. And it has implications for patients, and it's all very visible, right? So if we get something wrong, we get a headline, children are being treated as lab rats. Why are medicines in short supply after Hurricane Maria? When unapproved drugs are the only hope. EpiPen shortages. Clinical trials have too little racial diversity. Company denies a drug to a dying child, right? So what we do is under a microscope. So I thought what I would pick, many of you probably know about compassionate access. We call it compassionate access. There's all kinds of terminology, but basically what I'm talking about is before a drug is approved while we're still studying it, when single patients, individual people, and their families and their doctors ask us if they could access the drug. And I want to walk through, I have a few cases, but I'm going to walk relatively deeply into one particular case because it had an influence, tremendous influence on us at J&J in terms of how we developed our policy and how we decided to move forward. But I think it had an impact on our whole industry. So we'll talk about a case, we'll talk about all the different perspectives, and then just talk about a new approach that we took and get your input. So it's a famous case, Josh Hardy. It's well known, so I'm using his name. It's okay. And he was a small boy who had a horrible disease for which he needed a stem cell transplant. It's a very toxic regimen of drugs to basically ablate or get rid of his entire stem cell and then get a stem cell transplant. And he was at St. Jude's Hospital, which is an amazing place. This is January 2014. And while recovering, it was a bone marrow transplant. While recovering from the bone marrow transplant, he developed an adenovirus infection, which many of us get, but if you're immunocompromised, if you don't have good immune cells, it could be devastating. And he was extremely ill, as you could see in that picture. His treating doctors at St. Jude made repeated requests to a small company called Chimerix for him to receive compassionate access to a drug called brincidofovir, which was a drug in clinical trials that had similar efficacy to a drug that was already out there for adenovirus. But Josh, unfortunately, had a horrible side effect from the current treatment. He couldn't tolerate it anymore, so his adenovirus was growing out of control. And so they wanted to be able to treat him with brincidofovir instead because they felt it had similar efficacy, but it had a much better safety profile. So they petitioned the company, requested of the company to give access to this young boy. And on March 4th, the family came out on social media. And I want to read you what they said. They said, "Our son, Josh Hardy, recently had a bone marrow transplant, developed the adenovirus. This is a deadly virus for people who have weak immune systems. There's a drug called brincidofovir that has been proved to treat the adenovirus effectively." Now this is the patient's family writing, so this is their perception. "Our doctor at St. Jude told us that they ran the study for the drug company and he knows it will work." Okay, they're saying the doctor knows. I don't know what the doctor said to the family, but this is the family's perception. The doctor knows it will work. However, the drug company has refused to release the drug for compassionate care because they're trying to take it to market. Basically, they are not going to save a child's life for money, right? This is what everyone thinks, right? This is the headline. This is what, you know, many of you watching this and going through this case are thinking, right? Why else wouldn't they give the child the drug, right? And what they're saying, if anyone can influence, please help us convince Chimerix to release the drug for compassionate care. We would be forever grateful. Who could fault them? Their child is dying. And that went up on social media, and I don't have to tell you, you all know how it works. Thousands and thousands of petitions and tweets and quarterbacks and people, Fox News, and everybody getting involved, really slamming the company and asking the company in nice ways and not so nice ways, and death threats, etc., to release this drug for this boy. And the CEO, his name is Ken Mock, he responded online also. He posted on Facebook, and what he wrote was, we have a small company, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, as we progress to larger and more complex efficacy and safety trials designed to gain FDA approval, we made the difficult decision 2 years ago to cease our compassionate use program and focus on earning FDA approval. So they had already said no to many other people, apparently. This is the only path to make brincidofovir widely available to those who need it in the fastest manner allowed. How many of you feel good about what the CEO wrote? Yeah, nobody. But for those of you on the web, nobody raised his or her hand. The next day, this is Richard Plotkin, who's a lawyer and in a patient advocacy foundation, and he wrote and said, he was on Fox News, my goal was to get Josh Hardy the drug, and if in fact he died, I'd have done everything in my power to destroy the company and Mr. Mock. Okay, this is bad. This is bad. Over the weekend, someone at the FDA saw what was going on social media, saw it on the news, and she actually herself reached out to the company and said, this is awful. Can we work with you somehow to get this drug to this child? And they worked together over the weekend and very quickly came up with an idea to put together a study, an open label study, and they made it so that that Josh fit into all the inclusion-exclusion criteria. He would be the first patient in emergency, got it approved, and they were able to get the patient, Josh Hardy, the medicine, and he recovered, was at home happy with his family. He was discharged from the hospital. Someone else was discharged. The CEO of the company lost his job after that because of this episode. And then something else happened. The world of ethics started thinking about this and thought, are we crowdsourcing medical decisions right now and ethical decisions? Are we deciding that we're only going to provide medicines for compassionate access when there's a cute child or a terrible case that tears our heart out, but for maybe someone who's older, we're not gonna do anything and it's okay? How should the company have made the decision? Is this the right way? What happened here? Was this right? It made us all feel good that a child's life was saved, but what about all the other people that they said no to? And what about people who are not savvy in social media? It didn't feel right. So let's just go through some of the perspectives. It's important to understand what happened here. Okay, so let's just take a step back. Let's think through some of the stakeholders involved in the decisions about whether to provide access, compassionate access. And let's think of the ethical framework as we go through it. So there are, of course, a lot of stakeholders. First and foremost, the FDA. And they have to be the ones, they are the safeguards of public health, right? They are the ones who have to balance the needs of individual patients with the needs of society as a whole, because they are the gatekeepers that review all of the safety and efficacy information on drugs, which were only used in a small proportion of people. And they open the gates for those medicines to be approved and used to as many people as possible, right? So they are the gatekeepers to the access to those medicines. What about patients and their advocates? People who ask for compassionate access are usually very ill and their families are working with them, their physicians working with them. Almost always they've exhausted all other treatment options for serious and often fatal diseases. But more and more people are better informed now. You know, in the past, people didn't necessarily know what drugs were available, right? But everything is on the internet now, clinicaltrials.gov, right? Things in the business news. So families know more and more what medicines are out there being studied. And in fact, some people are called citizen scientists. I would argue sometimes people in my family, some of my friends, they know more about some of these new drugs than I do, right? Because they are motivated, they are doing a lot of interest, and many of them are extremely bright. But the only option before a medicine is approved is to either be in a clinical trial or to petition to get pre-approval access, compassionate access. So they are out of options, and you can understand how they feel, right? You can understand how Josh's family felt. And here's where the ethics of patient autonomy comes in, right? I'm sure you've talked a lot about that in this class. The primary ethical argument for expanded access is that patients should have a right to mitigate extreme suffering, that they have to enhance their self-preservation. It assumes, though, that people are capable of making well-informed decisions and assumes that they have the ability to accurately identify promising new drugs and make good benefit-risk decisions about their own health, taking an experimental treatment, right? But others point out to the low probability that an early stage medicine is really going to have a meaningful benefit. And the limited data available on a medicine so early on in development can really lead to vulnerability. You have to understand that sometimes, especially early on, the medicine may have been tried in half a dozen, whatever it is, number of people. We don't know everything about the product, and certainly until the studies are completed, until the FDA weighs in, it's very difficult to make a benefit-risk decision. Some advocacy groups, like the ALS Association, feels it's absolutely critical that people with ALS continue to participate in clinical trials. Well, there are other patient advocacy groups, one called the Abigail Alliance, that they are promoting creative ways of increasing expanded access and compassionate use. And in fact, they argue that the FDA should license drugs to terminally ill people after it's completed phase 1. Phase 1 is the very first step in drug development. So they're saying they shouldn't even be in clinical trials. The FDA should just let all of these people get access to these medicines. What about the medical community, right? Physicians are on the front lines. They have people in front of them who are sick and dying and have an immediate need for help, who have exhausted all other options. But they have difficulty determining benefit risk with an experimental medicine that they haven't used on other people. And the science is complicated, and it's getting even more complex. They want more, not less data, right? They want efficacy and safety data. They want to be sure that they're advising people to make good decisions, that they're not going to spend the last weeks or months of their lives with some terrible side effects unnecessarily, right? They're in a very tough position. And what about the government? I'm not going to say much about the government. I hope you don't mind. But there is new legislation, it's called Right to Try, that completely cuts the FDA out of the process, out of the whole compassionate access process, and says that people in many states, 24 states, and now the government has passed it, this slide is a little old, have the right to access medicines without ever going through an IRB, without going through the FDA. And then you have industry, right? And we all saw what people think, right? They're not going to save a child's life from money, right? That's what everyone thinks. So let's tease it out a little bit. Let's talk about what the issues really are. What is the issue in industry? Why don't we just give medicines? Okay. Am I not?
Mike's having problems just
Okay. Okay. Uh-oh. I hope people on the web have been able to hear me.
Right.
No?
They've been able to hear you, but
But it's bad?
just a little something.
Okay. Apologies to everyone on the web. I'll just put it in my pocket. Just to save time. So I'm leaving you in suspense, right? Okay. Does that work better? I'll just put it in my pocket.
Great, thank you.
How is that? Does that sound better? Okay. Sorry for everybody on the web. Okay, so my favorite slide, right? This is what everyone thinks. But let's get into it, okay? What's really going on? Well, you saw there are all kinds of stakeholders, right? The FDA has a certain role, patients feel a certain way, physicians feel a certain way, the government feels a certain way. Guess who makes the decision? This is Harry Truman. He had something on his desk on the bottom right corner, and it said, "The buck stops here." Guess who has to make the decision and balance all of these risks, benefits, ethics, ethical issues, beneficence, we want to do well, maleficence, we don't want to hurt anyone, justice. It's us in industry, right? Often the physicians who are in charge of the individual projects. We have to make the decision to grant pre-approval access. Well, okay, so what's going on? So first of all, science and medicine is exploding. We're living in an amazing time. And it's exciting. There are changes. I think we're at the beginning of an incredible revolution in medicine. For those of you in the room who are much younger than I am, this is probably one of the most exciting times in medicine, and you're about to reap the benefits of it. We want to be able to help as many people as possible. We're people, right? I know I saw what the family wrote, right? We're people. We have family members. I have family members I've tried to get compassionate access for, or friends, or other colleagues who contact me. We want to be able to help as many people as possible. And we love our medicines. We love those medicines that we're progressing. We want to be able to use them. But let me explain. We have to focus. Our primary focus and obligation to society has to be on completing our clinical trials to be sure that we generate the evidence that the FDA needs to make a good decision for the public. We can't cut any corners, right? We have to give them enough information, and they'll tell us if it's not enough, believe me. We have to give them the information that they need to make a good decision, because that's how the most people will get access. If it's a great drug, the FDA approval is how the most people will get access to the drug. So we have to prioritize the clinical trials over these individual patient requests. And also, we don't want to do any harm, right? There's limited safety data so early, and there's limited efficacy data. A drug might look really good, and we especially might really believe it. But until you finish the studies, all you really know, every single drug has side effects. So whether you know the side effects or not, you know it's going to have side effects, but you don't know whether it's really going to work until you're done, right? And until you get FDA approval. And we don't want to do harm. And let's go back to what Ken Mock wrote, right? That they had a small company. It's hard to juggle. We have this in our own company too. It's hard for the single physician in charge of running the clinical trials, writing all the FDA documents, responding to all the investigators, to also make time in a 24-hour day to talk to an individual physician, get the whole history, try to understand what's going on. Then we have to try to get drugs shipped all over the world outside of a clinical trial. The physician has to fill out paperwork. It's very labor intensive, right? But also there's other issues, okay? There's limited drug supply, often. Not always, but oftentimes, especially with the newer modes of treatment that we have, there's very limited drug supply. So with biologics especially, early on, just to look at this graph for a second, on the left is preclinical, and then there's phase 1. That's the first introduction to man. You see on the bottom is a percentage. That is the percentage that a medicine will actually make it to getting approved and be a real medicine, right? That's used in people, that the FDA has approved. It's about 8 to 10%. So let's say 1 in 10 medicines that start and go into studies in people never makes it. It doesn't have the right efficacy or safety profile. And so we don't start, and we couldn't, right? It would never work if we just manufactured very early on enough medicine for hundreds and thousands of people. That's not sustainable, right? These medicines, especially early on, are made in the lab. They're not even made often in a manufacturing plant until we're much further on. So we can only make a certain amount of medicine. If you think of the CAR T, do you guys know what CAR T therapy is? Yeah, you've talked about it. Okay, so it's single. It's basically a medicines that are genetically it's modifying a patient's own immune cells to fight cancer, to fight the cancer. You take cells out of a patient's body. You have a whole lab, and all they do is work on that one person's blood and immune cells, and then we infuse it back into a person. And it's the new therapy that has actually led to some cures in some people with different types of cancers. We manufacture medicine one person at a time. You can't possibly manufacture medicine for everybody that's asking for compassionate access. This is a real issue that we face. So how do we prioritize between the clinical studies ongoing versus people who are requesting individual access? And then finally, if our primary responsibility is to finish the clinical trials to get access to the most people as possible, we have to be careful we're not doing something that could impact or delay those clinical trials, something that would divert patients from being in clinical trials to getting access another way, or disadvantage patients in studies. If you wanted a medicine, if you had cancer and you enrolled in a clinical trial and you could get either standard of care plus our new medicine, or you got the standard of care, right? That's the two treatment groups in the study. You decide you're sick and you're going to ask me for access, your compassionate access, right? How do you guys feel if I give her access to the medicine when you're participating in a clinical trial, making visits to the sites, getting your blood drawn, and taking a chance that you could get either the active drug on top of standard of care or just standard of care alone? Would that be fair if I just gave her access? These are really difficult decisions. What if she were not, I'm sorry, your name is Kim. What if it's not Kim, but what if her name is Josh Hardy? Ooh. A lot of you thought it wasn't the right idea to say no. What if her name is President Jimmy Carter? Or what if you're an employee of J&J? What if you're a friend of the chief medical officer of J&J? You know? What if you're a high-level government official in another country? These things happen. And we have to be fair. We have to be just in our decision-making. These are not easy questions. Let me walk you through a few examples outside of the Josh Hardy case, just so you see how these things are real and how they've been handled. So the first immuno-oncology treatments that came out, right, there were two of them. They came out in melanoma, incredible efficacy. Of course, it wasn't known at the time that they had incredible efficacy, right? So there was a person in a pivotal phase 3 clinical trial. The studies were ongoing in melanoma. This is a drug called Nivo. We'll just call it Nivo for short. People are in the phase 3. That's the final stage of clinical studies that you submit to the FDA for approval. One of the patients in the study, one of the women, figures out she's in the control arm, not in the drug-treated arm. She drops out of the study, and then her physician petitions the company for compassionate access to the drug. What would you do? You're me, right? You're the physician in the company. What would you do? Anybody, what would you do? Should I call on people? What would you do?
The whole process of clinical trials breaks down if people can choose which treatment arm they're in. You can't have equipoise if you can't assign people to both studies.
Exactly, exactly. You don't get equipoise, and also it's not fair, right? It's not fair to all the other people in the study. And also, they had said no to many other people because they don't know if the drug works or not, right? They don't know how safe it is. So they said no. Okay, the sponsor company said no. They denied the request. They said they had said no to other people and they have to focus on the clinical trials, as you said. Here's another example. This is our company. This is in 2005. just to show you how complex it is. We're in phase 2, right? So phase 1 is the very first introduction. You learn a little bit, especially in cancer, you learn which cancers the drug works in, or something more about the drug, the safety profile. Then sometimes you go directly into phase 3 or phase 2 to understand further. So from phase 2, we got very exciting results. At least we thought that they were exciting. We believed we saw efficacy in people. It's with sarcoma. It's a very awful cancer. Once we got a sense that the drug was working and we understood the safety profile, we felt good enough about it to submit it for approval to the health authorities, right, all over the world and FDA. That's usually a milestone for us and for many other companies, that if we have enough drug supply and we've seen the full efficacy and safety, if we feel good enough that we're going to submit it to the FDA and other health authorities, that we start giving it in expanded access protocols. Usually not one patient at a time. Usually at that point we'll open it up to people in larger protocols, group protocols, to be able to provide access to similar people. And the patients in the clinical trials also at that point get access to the drug, right? So we submitted the drug based on phase 2, based on early data, and we got the drug approved in 80 countries around the world. But we didn't get it approved in the US. So people in the US didn't have access anymore. Everywhere else it was approved. So what to do? So we continued the early access program in the US while we negotiated with the FDA on what type of study they would accept. What do we have to do? Obviously, they didn't agree with us. That happens. So it took a while to go back and forth with the FDA. We put together a phase 3, another protocol in patients with L-type sarcoma. What do we do now? We have to enroll our clinical trials. So we had an early access program. We had to stop it, right? We had to say if you have any sarcoma, you can get access to the drug, but if you have L-type sarcoma, which by the way, we thought it will work the best in, we had to stop giving patients the drug, right? We couldn't allow people in the United States who had this type of sarcoma because we had to enroll our clinical trials. And we needed to be fair to the people in the clinical trials, right? Just like we demonstrated here. We couldn't be asking people to be in clinical trials and just give it to other people outside of the clinical trials. In 2014, we got information on the drug. It worked. We submitted the application to the FDA, and just like I shared with you before, once we do that, we opened up the program again to allow those patients now who were newly diagnosed to get access. And then we got FDA approval in October of 2015. After a decade, right, of going back and forth, yes, no, some patients got it, then we stopped it, yes, no. A total of over 3,200 patients got early access to the drug as we navigated this difficult pathway making these types of decisions, just so you see how complex it is. And adding to the complexity, social media. And believe me, the last thing that we want is to see ourselves on social media, especially with a case like Josh Hardy. We don't want to be the ones to say no to everybody. We don't want to be the ones to say no, not just to a small child who's ill and dying, but to anyone, right? We want to be able to help as many people as possible. And we don't want to be attacked, and we don't want to have death threats. And so in our decision making, right, here we are in industry balancing the needs of critically ill people with the needs of society. And so at J&J, we were navigating all this, as I just shared with you. Each team was navigating it separately. Each clinical leader, each physician in charge of team made separate decisions. Sometimes we said no to everybody. The team said, we're all going to hold hands, but we're going to say no to everybody because we don't know enough. And then we said, oh, this person works for the company, or this, yeah, okay, we're still going to, no, we'll give it to that person. Or, or some teams were just said, we're going to make, we're just going to make this decision no to everybody. It doesn't matter. We said no to a friend of someone high up in the company. We're just going to say no. Or we're going to make these kind of decisions based on the data that we see. Then we realized, especially with the Josh Hardy case, it was a real turning point for us. And at the same time, we were focused on a new drug that we had, which we believed was very, very exciting. It's called daratumumab. And it's a CD38. I won't go through the biology or the mechanism. But basically, in the very first administration that we saw to people with multiple myeloma who had failed everything else, several of the patients had incredible responses. We saw the cancer depleted from their bone marrows. Very early days, just a few patients, right, out of a group of maybe a couple of dozen, and we were very encouraged by the data. Multiple myeloma, it's not a very common disease, but it's not very rare, right? So we knew once it gets out, once we started our phase 3 programs and people knew we had an exciting therapy, we're going to get a lot of requests. What to do? It's a biologic. And I mentioned before that sometimes we don't make that much. This was in phase 1. We went very quickly into our studies because we got incredible efficacy. The FDA also said, go fast. This is great. These are great data. We had so many clinical trials that we were starting. We saw so many potential applications for this medicine. We started many different clinical trials. We did not have enough for compassionate access. And so this was a situation where the team said, okay, we're just saying no to everything. It's going to be hard. We're going to say no to everything. Then my group thought about it, got involved. We're talking to them because we started getting requests. And we said, you know, when you do clinical trials, let's say you have 1,000 patients, you usually make drug for 1,100, right? So we went to the clinical team like, you have drug for 1,100 patients. You're only going to recruit 1,000. I'm sure you'll be okay if you have 1,099. And they were like, you know, Joanne, of course, you know, we have, but, you know, how can we say yes to one person and no to everybody else? What if it's my mother, my sister, my child? You know, if this drug was really good, if we're going to save a single life, maybe we can say yes to one person. Maybe it's worth it for that family, right? Maybe we have to just say, you know, maybe we'll say yes. How do you make that decision, though? How do you decide which person? That's where it got really, really complicated. And we started getting requests. And I said to my team, I said, if they can give us drug for one person, they could probably give us drug for 5 people. How do we choose those 5 people, right? Is it going to be the family that has a social media campaign and a child? Is it going to be someone in the United States? You know, these are tough questions. And thinking about the Josh Hardy case especially. And one of the people at a meeting that we had, one of the ethics meetings that we have with NYU, someone said, what if the energy of so many talented and passionate people who were all arguing on social media and, you know, and arguing with each other and spending time on Facebook, et cetera, what if their talent and passion was channeled to find solutions for many patients and not just one boy? And so what we did was we reached out. We thought about our ethical principles, right? This is what we do. We kind of discipline ourselves. You're familiar with them. We add transparency. We try to be as transparent as possible, especially in difficult situations like this, because, you know, that's always a good metric, right? If you can live up to it after you see it, you know, on the front page of the New York Times, then you've probably done a good job, right? And so what we did was, in making this decision, we decided to reach out for help and get a consultation with NYU, the School of Medicine, the Division of Ethics, Art Kaplan and his team. And after working on it relatively quickly, because we were in the thick of things, right, we worked together to launch what we now fondly call COMPAC, Compassionate Access Committee. And so remember, we're in a situation where a single physician who works for a company is making a decision, a life and death decision, right? To a situation where we got external independent input. They put together a committee, not just of physicians who were external, right? So they didn't have the same potential biases that we did or concerns that we did, but also ethicists and also patient advocates, patient representatives. And they insisted on being blinded, so they didn't know if the person was a congressman, a newscaster, or someone who has, you know, many children, modest means, living in Kansas. And they made the decisions based on the criteria that they felt were important. And our role was to review the medical histories of the people who requested access, make sure that there's no exclusions. You know, for example, if the drug is contraindicated in someone with kidney disease, we made sure they didn't have kidney disease. But if everything else was met, then the cases, the histories of the people and all the medical information went to this committee, and they gave us advice, yes or no, whether to give the access to this medicine to that patient, that family. And we started off, as I said, literally with one person, then 5. Then the clinical team, they came to us and said, you know what, we finished enrolling this one study, we have extra medicine on another 5 people. And sometimes the committee had to triage because that week there wasn't enough medicine for everyone. And they tried to keep in touch so that if there was more medicine that opened up, they would try to triage those people against the new people who had applied. But the bottom line was, after about a year, 165 people had access to this new medicine, 165 approvals. And in November of 2015, in an accelerated fashion, the FDA approved the medicine, so we were able to open it up to everyone in the United States. And how did we make it work? So I started by asking you if you would work with industry. And I hope I've convinced you that we need help, right? We need consultation. We make difficult decisions. These can be life and death decisions. And I think you, the public, wants us to have independent input into some of the critical decisions that we make. This required us to actually be a little uncomfortable. We had an external group of the Compassionate Access Committee. We called it opening the kimono. We actually shared more information with them than we usually share. We told them, we agreed to tell them if a regulatory body, if a health authority gave us bad feedback, because we felt it was important for them to know everything. Of course, we shared all the ins and outs of the drug supply. We usually don't share that with anyone, right? Any new safety issues that came up, new efficacy, everything that was going on, we shared with them. And we also were very transparent. Everything that was happening, our policies, how to navigate our system, we posted it online. The Compact posted all their decisions online, nothing about individual people, but just the process and the decisions. And we made sure that there was timely communication back to the patients and their families, back to the physicians, if we said yes or no. We made that commitment, the Compassionate Access Committee made that commitment. So let's do a little epilogue. Let's just talk about Josh Hardy for 1 minute. Remember this. Remember the family's perception, true or not, was that the doctor at St. Jude told us that they ran the study and he knows it will work. Actually, that drug failed its pivotal trial. It is still not approved. In the phase 3 study versus placebo, it did not work. Better than placebo. And Josh Hardy passed away as well. He lived till he was 10 years old. What happened at J&J? That case had a lot of impact on us, what happened to that child and his family. We really believed that this was such a great new process for us, a new way of working, a new way to consider the ethics and the benefits and risks, that we took this Compassionate Access Committee whole process and review from having just one product to all of our products, all of our, we call them assets, right? So every product, when it gets to a certain stage, as soon as we start learning a little bit, we bring it to the Compassionate Access Committee. And we kind of say, we think now we have enough information to do this, or we don't know and we don't have enough information, so we're not going to give it to anyone, but we'll come back to you if we get a request like this. And we come to agreement, broad agreement in general terms, so we can act knowing their input. And if we get individual cases that fall outside, or if we feel we have to say no to someone in a situation, even if after we've agreed and it doesn't feel right, we know we can go to the Compassionate Access Committee. And they actually have multiple committees now for different therapeutic areas. We don't only do this now for oncology, we do it for infectious diseases as well as neurosciences, severe depression. We have a new drug. And we have another committee that's just for anything else that comes up. And there are other companies now that are accessing and getting this kind of input. And we've seen a benefit internally. In fact, when we first came up with this idea to get external input, the clinicians, the doctors in our company first said to us, Joanne, we know more than anyone else about the drug. How is anyone else going to make this decision? But we convinced them that it was important to get this ethical input and get this committee going. And now, as an epilogue, in retrospect, the physicians working in our company came to us and said, you know what, we didn't know this was going to happen, but we love this. We really feel much more comfortable and confident now in what we're doing. We weren't sleeping at night. And also, this also removed a lot of stress and distraction for us while we're trying to do our best on the FDA filings. And most importantly, and this is where I'll close, we're hearing back from patients, right? Now, I don't want you to think every patient benefits, because they don't, right? Many people don't benefit from compassionate access. But some people do, right? That's why we do what we do in industry. That's why we go to work every day. It's to get emails like this that says, you've offered the whole of our family a lifeline, and we'll never be able to thank you enough. That's why we do what we do every day. That's why I'm here to talk to you, because ethics, bioethics are so important, and we need to work together to make this work on behalf of the people who are counting on us to do it right. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Very inspiring. And the floor is open. And people who are watching online, if you email questions, we'll be happy to have those raised too. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Waldstreicher, for that wonderful presentation. What other areas in drug development and marketing do you think industry is looking for external input from bioethicists? You mentioned conflicts of interest and data transparency and a whole range of issues at the beginning. Which do you think are the most important, and can you speak to other companies other than J&J where you think the whole industry is looking for help?
Yeah.
Do we need to repeat the question? Or
Sure.
Oh, all right. Sorry.
I can repeat it if you want. You
Okay,
basically
yeah.
asked what other issues come up, what are some of the biggest issues, and whether I'm speaking for J&J or other companies as well. So I'll start at the end and just tell you I'm only speaking for J&J. I'm only speaking for myself. I can't speak for others because they don't have the same infrastructure and activities that we do, and I don't know, of course, what goes on at other companies. Actually, Carla, who's in the room, runs our bioethics committee, so she's probably the best person to say. But we have, I think, clinical research issues outside of expanded access are among the most difficult that we have to deal with, especially when we feel that there is a direct challenge, an ethical challenge that, and we know we have to stop and get input. Just a few examples, okay? Big things that happen. And I don't think, it's hard to triage because new things, Carla, surprise us all the time and come up, right? So, and a lot of them are product dependent. So as an example, you don't know this because it's not in the media, but we have an Ebola vaccine, right? Everybody here in the United States has forgotten about Ebola. But when the Ebola epidemic came out, we had an Ebola vaccine that we had been working on in the usual speed, but now it became, pedal to the metal. And even though nobody here is interested in it anymore, we continue to work on it with collaborations from all over the world. And we now have it on the ground. There's a new emerging epidemic in Africa, and we have it on the ground. Now, in thinking about how to do clinical trials, we came up with a specific issue that consents in that area of the world are usually given by a community leader, not individually. That's not the way we work, right? We do individual informed consent. And so we had that challenge, how to navigate that challenge. We have issues that come up. Sometimes we We've had a situation where we did a clinical trial and it was not successful. And so we had an extension that was planned, but we decided to stop because it wasn't successful and we were not going to apply for a regulatory approval. But the investigators treating the patients, they felt that their patients were getting better. So they wanted us to continue, right? And so did, we had an external data monitoring committee, right? They felt the same way. They didn't care that, it didn't meet regulatory standards. They believed that in some of the people, some of the patients, it happened to be a trial in children, they believed it was helping them. What to do, right? Especially when you have an independent committee that's telling you to continue, but your group feels ethically, it's not ethical to continue. Carla, what other big things? Yeah.
And I was just going to add, I think, to speak, Jennifer, to your question about when it comes up, like for when we went on external input, I think we've things that I've noticed are when we're very conflicted, there's a lot of tension internally. If we know that we have something coming to the committee and we have pretty strong opinions on either side, so often questions around access to medicines. The data transparency effort is another one where we thought that it was important to make sure that individuals believed that we had a credible process for making decisions around what research would get access to our clinical trial data independently. So I think those cases where there's concerns about people's belief in a process, like with a compassionate access, having that be credible, fair, transparent, or when we've had significant divides within our organization, we've found benefit by reflecting with an external third party who can come in and be independent and talk through those with us, I think.
We also have sometimes drug shortages, unfortunately. Sometimes for drugs that are marketed, or sometimes for drugs that are in development, and we know once we launch them that there's going to be a shortage, and we have to come up with strategies. How do we triage where we launch the product, which areas we get access to? So those issues come up, unfortunately, quite a bit. Other questions? Yes?
So this is a great. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation, and J&J has always been at the forefront of thinking about patients and ethics. I'm wondering if you could help us understand how issues come to your group. What's the pipeline through which an ethical issue is identified somewhere within the organization and makes its way to you, and where does your group fit in the corporate structure?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a bioethics committee that Carla actually runs, where we have a group of people who are experienced in ethicists, some people who have been on IRBs, people who are formally trained in ethics, and they are there to give advice to teams if there are ethical issues come up. So people in the company know that if there's a bioethical issue, they can bring it to that committee. But very importantly, my group works on safety, so we see all of the products that way. But also, we run all of the pipeline review committees for late-stage development. So as an example, I personally run the development review committee I see all of the pharmaceutical development programs going through phase 2, phase 3. And so I see everything, I see the results. So either, I'm seeing it, our safety officers are seeing it, we see what's going on in teams. People come to us, people come to me, and I'll either help them myself or refer them to our ethics committee. And when we have really big issues, like with the compassionate access, that was a company-wide issue. Sometimes we just locked ourselves in a room, until we came up with what we thought was the best thing, which ended up being opening up the door and getting external input. But that's basically how it works. Yeah.
Hi. So thank you so much for that lecture. I really appreciate it. But sensationalism is becoming a really big part of today's culture, especially with social media becoming more prominent in government affairs and the FDA specifically. So what is the way that a public company like J&J should respond to these emotionally charged individual cases?
Yeah, it's such an important issue because we definitely are influenced by social media, and we're people, so it's hurtful when you see things like was characterized in the Josh Hardy case, when you see that people think that you're making decisions, because you don't care and you only care about money, right? We're people too, and we're trying to do the best thing. So social media, as all of you know, right, is a double-edged sword. So, strategy, right? We have so many interactions with social media in different ways. I think but just pulling myself back from an ethics perspective and from the important decision making that we do, especially in my group, where we're making important safety decisions or compassionate access kinds of decisions. The most important thing is that we have to commit to ourselves that we're not going to be influenced by social media, right? That's where we kind of step back and take a deep breath and review the bioethical principles and the credo that's on the wall, right? Every single, all over J&J. And say to ourselves, we're not going to make a rash decision based on those kind of influences. And a lot of times, getting external input really helps a lot for those important decisions, right? So I can just tell you with the Compassionate Access Committee, unlike the Josh Hardy case, we did not get a single complaint. We were transparent about the process. People knew. We got back to them quickly. We explained the situation, and we didn't get a single complaint. We've had with our data sharing, our data transparency policy, we work with the Yale School of Medicine. They review and have decisions on whether we should release our data for research requests. And also, we haven't had a single complaint because it's an independent external group that makes the decision, vets the research proposal, and it's transparent. Everything is open. And so I think that's the best way to deal with that.
We have a few questions online.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we have quite a good number of questions. So
Okay.
we have one question from Dean, and he's talking about the cancer drug trial where the patient learned that they were in the control group.
Yes.
And his question is whether shouldn't the study be run with serious doubts, and shouldn't they have restarted the study once the patient knew?
Well,
Or they had figured it out?
it's a good question, because sometimes you have to worry about whether patients are unblinded. So I think that's the question. The question is, if you think people can get unblinded, should you stop a study? And I think like a lot of other questions, right? It depends. If you're doing a depression study, it's different than if you're doing a cancer study. In fact, many cancer studies are not even blinded, right? They're open arms, open label, we call them, because the responses are very objective. And usually the endpoint is overall survival, right? So I don't think that having a single patient drop out or even a single patient being unblinded, I don't think that would ruin the integrity of the study. It's certainly something, and also I just want to say, we don't know whether the person really knew that she was on the control group. It was just that probably she wasn't getting better and assumed she was on the control group. So it depends.
Do you want to ask one more from there?
Sure.
Yeah, we also have a question from Ali Schultz, and she asks, what are your thoughts on I-SPY2 trials? Do you think we will be seeing them used more often in the future? And do you think they can or should replace traditional phase RCTs?
Yeah, this is from someone who really understands industry. So I-SPY is a trial in patients with cancer, and it's kind of a super adaptive design trial so that people go into the study, and based on their characteristics, they could be treated with multiple different drugs from multiple different companies, and it's actually run by a third party. And I think this is a great mechanism. We actually supported I-SPY, even though we didn't have any drugs in it, because we just thought it was so important. We are working on other platform trials. We're working for one in TB in particular, so I think that it is a really very promising, not just because there are external groups running the study, but because you can compare many different drugs from different companies in the same study. You also minimize the control group, right? Because there could be one control group and many different drugs, and so you're minimizing the potential burden on people to be on a placebo or a control arm. And also the technique of rapidly seeing if someone is responding or not responding, and if they're not responding, this is what they do in the study, they quickly can move them over into another treatment arm, I think really honors people who volunteer for research by giving them multiple opportunities to benefit. And so I think it's fantastic, and I thank the person who asked that question.
Yes.
Thank you for your talk and having it be focused on industry. I currently work in healthcare industry, except instead of making a drug product, I'm focused on creating a digital product that helps deliver CBT therapy to medically ill patients or comorbid patients. And
You want to say what CBT in case somebody...
cognitive behavioral therapy.
That's great. Thank you.
Of course.
by the way.
So thank you for your work. So the constant question that we always have for ourselves is with the uptick in amount of direct-to-consumer health products and the amount of information there is out there, whether it be correct information or incorrect information, we as a provider of mental health services have a responsibility to provide information to patients such that they understand what the program entails, and also to help them navigate care with all the other doubts that they may have had with prior mental health care that they have had. With citizen science as a whole and all this information being out there, how does your group actually go about helping patients who may have read such information online, whether it be erroneous or not erroneous, to fully go through with decisions that do impact their care?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We work very hard to generate information for physicians as well as for patients, and we're very restricted on what we can say by our product label. And so we work really hard to try to make the information as understandable as possible, and certainly has to be truthful and honest, but understandable. But we can really only talk about what's in our product label. We really can't talk about other products, right? So it's a fine line that we have to walk. We have to rely on, what we call the third party, a learned third, intermediary, right? You have the same thing, the physician, the caregiver, the health practitioner, the nurse practitioner, the PA, for them to be able to walk people through and explain to them different types of treatment options, whereas we can only talk about ours and the approved label. Thanks. Hi.
So, as
It's
a chief medical officer, I was wondering if you've ever had to make the difficult decision to overturn or delay or I guess amend a decision made by the ethics committee, and if so, what was the type of situation and what was your proposition?
So I can't recall a time when something that the ethics committee decided was actually overturned in our company. The input from the ethics committee is taken very seriously, and they would really, the team would have to come up with a very serious argument, why they wouldn't follow that advice. I can tell you that the decisions that our group makes in safety, for example, have certainly been different than decisions that other teams have made. And for safety, our group has the final say. So our team has had to stop the development of products, pull products off the market, add new safety information to the label, stop a phase 3 program, a pivotal study because of concerns. So we're constantly balancing and navigating this difficult area. But I can't think of a situation where we've overturned our ethics committee. Thanks.
Let's move back online.
Yeah, so we have a couple more questions.
Okay.
We have a question from Zach, and he asks if a treatment is not yet demonstrated that it is effective and safe in a given population, is it not unethical to provide it to anyone regardless of their present condition? And additionally, in the Josh Hardy case, did the child's doctor act unethically both in how he approached getting the child the medication and stating that he knows it will work without evidence?
Right. So let's talk about the second one first. So I wasn't in the room. It's really a great question, and that's why I highlight it. I wasn't in the room in the conversation between the doctor and the family. So I really don't know what that doctor said. I don't think I could second guess and really blame him. He's got a dying child in front of him, and he's had personal experience with a medicine that could potentially, and I'm saying potentially, save the child's life. So I can't fault him for being unethical. I just think that this is a difficult dilemma with no good answer, right? And that's, that's what ethical dilemmas are, right? There's there's a difficult answer. There's more than one answer. You don't know what
There are better answers.
There are better answers. That's okay. But they're all difficult. These are difficult decisions. And then the other question was whether it's completely unethical to provide any access before you know the full safety and efficacy profile.
Yeah.
Is that the question? And you know, that's where it depends, right? And that's why we felt it was so important to get external input. So what does it mean to have full safety and efficacy information, or any efficacy and safety? With our daratumumab, we had, you know, the first dozen or so, right, patients who had clear bone marrow. So we were, you know, we felt this drug might really help some people who are literally dying and out of all options. Remember, we don't use this in everyone, right? We use compassionate access for people who literally are out of options. If we know that there's a clinical trial that they could be in, or that they haven't tried all the options, you know, the Compassionate Access Committee sends them right back and says, you haven't tried everything yet. So you have a little bit of information, right? Then you get more information in phase 2 or phase 3. And as I told you, sometimes after phase 3, if we have enough drug, we'll open it up even wider. But then we made a judgment, but then FDA makes a different decision sometimes, right? And then we have to stop. So it all depends on judgment and on information and weighing the benefits and risks of the product, and also the principles of bioethics. And that's why it's so critical to get that external input.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but clearly there's lots and lots to talk about. This is fabulous, raising lots of questions in many of our minds, and areas for future thought. So please join me in thanking Dr. Waldstreicher.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone on the web as well. Thanks.
And just as a reminder, our next event on November 15th, we're having a wonderful session on physician aid in dying with Bernie Lowe, who is the president of the Greenwall Foundation, with Dr. Gruber, who's the president and the national director of Physicians for Compassionate Choices, and with Ken Prager, who is the head of the Clinical Ethics Committee here. So they have very different perspectives on the issue, but we hope you'll join us. Thank you. Thank you. This was great. Thank you. It was fascinating. Very well done. I really